The soft murmur of the waves lapping against the shore was a constant backdrop to the sound of Ian's laughter as he tossed a stick across the sandy beach. His golden retriever, Finn, barked excitedly, his tail wagging furiously as he bounded after the stick, kicking up sand in his wake. The beach was nearly empty, the sky overcast, with a cool breeze blowing in from the sea. It was a typical day on the coast of Ireland, the kind that Ian loved the most, just him, the sea, and Finn. "Good boy, Finn!" Ian shouted, clapping his hands as the dog raced back to him, stick clutched proudly in his jaws. The dog's golden fur gleamed in the pale light, his eyes bright with joy. "Ready, boy?" Ian asked, lifting the stick high. Finn barked again, jumping up on his hind legs in anticipation. With a laugh, Ian threw the stick farther this time, watching as it sailed through the air before landing near a bend in the shoreline, where the beach curved around a rocky outcrop. Finn bolted after it, his paws leaving prints in the wet sand. Ian watched him go, smiling to himself. But as Finn rounded the bend, disappearing from sight, a sudden unease gripped Ian. He waited for the sound of Finn's returning barks, but they didn't come. "Finn!" Ian called out, starting to jog toward the bend. His heart began to pound, a cold knot of worry forming in his stomach. "Finn, where are you?" Rounding the bend, Ian found himself on a smaller, more secluded stretch of beach, the rocky outcrop rising behind him like a jagged wall. But Finn was nowhere to be seen. The stick lay abandoned on the sand, but there was no sign of the dog. Panic began to set in as Ian scanned the area, calling out for his dog. The waves seemed louder now, more ominous, crashing against the rocks with a relentless force. "Finn!" Ian shouted, his voice trembling, but there was no response, only the howling wind and the roar of the sea. And then, as he turned toward the water, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, half submerged in the shallows, was a creature unlike anything Ian had ever seen. Its skin was a sickly green, covered in slimy scales that glistened in the pale light. Its eyes were large, bulging and fish-like, reflecting the dull grey of the sky. The creature's upper body was humanoid, with long webbed fingers that grasped at the sand, but below its waist, the creature had the tail of a fish, its fins twitching weakly in the shallow water. Ian froze, his breath catching in his throat. The creature looked at him, its wide, fish-like eyes filled with what seemed to be a mix of fear and desperation. It made a soft, almost pleading noise, its webbed hand gesturing toward Ian as if asking for help. For a long moment, Ian just stood there, too terrified to move. But something in the creature's gaze made him take a hesitant step forward. It was scared, he realized. Scared and stuck. The creature was trapped, one of its arms lodged between two large rocks in the shallows, perhaps caught there when the tide had gone out. Ian's heart pounded in his chest as he slowly approached, his eyes never leaving the creature's. It watched him, his gaze wary but hopeful. Ian could see the creature's chest rising and falling rapidly, its breath laboured. I'm going to help you," Ian whispered, more to reassure himself than the creature. He knelt by the rocks, careful to keep some distance between himself and the creature's sharp-looking claws. The creature didn't move as Ian studied the rocks, trying to figure out how to free it. The stones were heavy, but with some effort, Ian managed to shift one, creating enough space for the creature to pull its arm free. It let out a soft, relieved sound, rubbing its injured arm with its other hand. For a moment, they just looked at each other, boy and creature, both unsure of what to do next. The creature's eyes seemed to soften, and it made another gesture, this time placing its webbed hand over its chest in what Ian could only interpret as a gesture of thanks. Ian smiled nervously, relieved that the creature seemed friendly. "You're welcome," he said, though he wasn't sure if it could understand him. But as the initial relief began to fade, a new feeling crept in, one of unease. The creature's eyes, which had seemed so gentle a moment ago, were now studying Ian with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. It was as if the creature was sizing him up, considering something that Ian couldn't quite grasp. Suddenly, the creature moved, shifting closer to Ian. Its movements were slow and deliberate, but there was something predatory in the way it watched him, something that made Ian's instincts scream at him to run. He took a step back, his pulse quickening. The creature tilted its head as if considering whether to pursue him or not. For a moment, Ian was sure it was going to attack, His body tensed, ready to bolt, but then the creature stopped. It made no further move toward him, instead backing away slowly, its eyes still locked on Ian. The tension between them hung in the air like a storm about to break, but then the creature turned, its tail flicking up a spray of water as it began to retreat into the sea. Ian let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The creature paused at the edge of the water, glancing back at him one last time before slipping beneath the waves, disappearing into the depths. Shaking, Ian stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the creature had vanished. Relief washed over him in waves, but it was quickly replaced by another surge of panic. "Finn," he whispered, remembering why he'd come this far in the first place. He turned and began running down the beach, calling out his dog's name. "Finn! Finn! Where are you?" He searched the beach, the dunes, even the rocks, but there was no sign of his beloved dog. The sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. Ian's voice grew hoarse from shouting, his eyes stinging with tears as he realized that Finn was gone. Defeated, Ian finally turned back toward home, his heart heavy. He couldn't understand what had happened. Where had Finn gone? As he disappeared from view, the sea remained quiet and still, but beneath the surface, where the light of the setting sun barely reached, the creature swam deeper, its webbed fingers curled around the lifeless form of a golden retriever. The dog's body was limp, its fur stained with dark, inky blood as the creature dragged it into the depths. The creature paused for a moment, looking back toward the shore where Ian had vanished. Then, with a final flick of its powerful tail, it disappeared into the darkness, taking its prize with it. And above, on the surface, the waves continued to lap gently against the shore, as if nothing at all had happened.